I'm a Tucson High senior, and I fell in love with your book, and it's amazing. It related to me how, like, you know, a bunch of some people would call stereotypes, but it's truthfully funny. But I fell in love with your book, and it's making me want to read more books.
My name is Erika Flores. I'm also a senior at Tucson High, and your book was really inspiring. I mean, it's a lot of it has to do with like going through troubles, and I mean, I could relate to it, so I really liked it.
Yeah, I'm Soraya Sandoval. I'm also a senior at Tucson High, and your book is like really realistic to actual school life, and like it brought to me the realization of getting our voices out, or whenever we know somebody that's being bullied.
Oh, my name's Erika Flores, and I'm the only junior in this group. But yeah, I really liked your book, and I really liked the chance to get to relate to. Sorry, it's like I have so many questions.
I'm ready. I am ready with answers.
But yeah, it was just interesting to finally be able to relate to somebody in a book.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dana Santiago, and I'm also a senior at Tucson High. And I really liked reading your book. It made it fun to read. Because I find it hard reading. So, but your book like really made it like interesting and fun to read. It made time go by fast. So I really enjoyed it.
I love that you find it hard to read, and that connection means so much to me. Thank you so much.
Well, my name is Jesus Ortega. I was captain of the football team for 4 years. I hated English. I hated reading, but I like read your book, and it just clicked. It actually like motivated me to read. So I read your book like 3 times. It's a great book.
Oh my gosh! Thank you so much. That's so nice.
And most of us do have the copy of Burn Baby Burn. Some of us are we were short on books, but I started reading, but life gets busy as a senior, but
oh, I know. It's really bad.
Yeah, but
it gets really bad.
I've already started to fall in love with the story, and it's amazing.
Oh. It's a scary story. It's a scary story.
We are at the 2016 Festival of Books in Tucson, Arizona. Today we are interviewing Meg Medina, the author of Yaqui Delgado and Burn Baby Burn. My name is Renee Simano, and I will be interviewing along with
Erika Flores,
Soraya Sandoval,
Eileen Barajas,
Dana Santiago,
Jesus Ortega.
And I'll start off with ladies first. Erika, go ahead.
What?
Being a gentleman.
You got thrown under the bus. This is what that's for.
Alright. I actually have a question about the Burn Baby Burn. It's kind of like a mystery, so when you're writing it, what was actually going through your head? Because it's at a point where the 2 girls are being told that they can't go by themselves and all these shootings, so what's like the main reason behind all this? Because it's kind of intense right now.
So here's what happened. I was 13 in 1977, so I'm pretty old. But what was happening in New York City at the time is that the city was on the brink of financial disaster. It was almost bankrupt. So like if you were a teacher, you ran to the bank on Friday to cash your check because you really weren't sure if the city had funds to pay you. Crime was really high. So I remember that you were always looking over your shoulder to see if you were being followed. You could be mugged on the way to school, like all things like this could happen. Race relations were really tense in the city, with neighborhoods, traditionally Latino and African American neighborhoods, virtually abandoned by the city. And there was arson. So people were lighting apartment buildings on fire. Sometimes it was the residents, and sometimes it was the landlord who wanted to get the insurance money. So there was all this crazy stuff going on, and on top of that, there was a serial killer. And he started to write to the newspaper. He would shoot young women in their cars with their dates, and he would write about this to the newspaper, and he called himself Son of Sam. So in the beginning, we had no idea that it was a serial killer. Just these random young women would end up dead. And then it started to come together into a clearer picture, especially when he started to write and tell us, I'll be back. I'm coming next weekend. And we were crazy with fear because he targeted women with long brown hair, and it was crazy. So what I remember of that time is just enormous fear of what was going on and enormous violence. But it wasn't all bad, because the women's movement was also starting up at that time. So women were on the street marching for ERA and demanding rights, and that was exciting. And then there was this entire explosion of music. Some of it you might find revolting, but disco music was like all the craze. And, also punk rock had suddenly come on the scene with like the Ramones and the Sex Pistols and groups that would sing into the microphone. And my mother would go, ¿Qué está oyendo, niña? And I would go, no sé, but it's fantastic. It was crazy time. So, you grow up and these experiences sort of sit in your mind. And so when I turned to write this novel, I was really thinking about violence in young people's lives, right? So at that time, we thought violence was all around us. And I think of you guys now. For example, I didn't ever have to do a shooter drill. That never crossed my mind, that one of my classmates could have an emotional collapse and shoot people. I didn't worry about someone with a backpack and a bomb. Like, those things are of your generation. They weren't of mine. But that sense that something could go gravely wrong at any time is the same. And so I felt like there was something to say across time. The city did come out of it. If you go to New York now, those neighborhoods that were terrible and frightening are these places like where Pottery Barn is. Like, it's insane. You walk around and you go, how was this achieved? It's just, you could ride the subway at any hour, really, and not feel like you're going to get jumped. So there is hope. Like, there is a way that you can survive it. And so what I did was look at violence out in the city, and then also violence within someone's family, because that exists, and we keep it secret, and that secrecy makes it a monstrosity. So that's how that happened.
Wow.
What a long answer. So how long have you got? I'll try to be brief.
I'll go. So, in one of your interviews, you said growing up there wasn't many Chicano or Chicana writers, and I want to ask, how does it feel to be one of the Chicano or Chicana writers to inspire the youth now, to inspire us to write? For myself, I'm starting off writing. I've been writing, but it's an amazing feeling knowing that there's people like Mexican American, Chicanos, Latinas, so on and so forth, that they're inspiring younger people to write. Yeah,
and I'm going to tell you what, in 10 years I'm going to expect that you're going to do the same thing for the next generation coming behind you. Because here's the thing, I'm actually not Chicana, I'm Cubana. My family came from Cuba. But here in the United States, right, it really matters. It's a really interesting thing, this term Latina.
Yeah.
Because it means you from Mexico, it can mean you from El Salvador, from Guatemala, from Cuba, from Puerto Rico, and we're all under this umbrella that isn't really accurate, because all these countries have such different histories and language and food, and yet there is a place where we are the same, right? Where there are commonalities, our language, the fact that our parents were immigrants, either in recent time or a little longer. So for me, I had to wait all the way till college to read Sandra Cisneros' House on Mango Street for me to see a Latina in the pages. And I remember looking, I just remember it so well, going, wow, tias y tíos, people in my business, frijoles, what's this? It was just like, oh my gosh. And I suddenly realized that I had been invisible, right?
Yeah.
And I loved to read as a kid. I read Charlotte's Web, I read lots of things. It didn't stop me from being a reader, but the power of seeing an example of people that looked and sounded like me, being able to carry a story, being worthy of a story, being added to the canon of literature was massively impactful. I mean, it just changed everything for me. So when I write now, I write about family, but I write about Latino families. And I'm writing against stereotype. I don't want Latino kids or any kids to think that all Latinas are, for example, Sofia Vergara, who's beautiful, right? But every joke on Modern Family, she's shanking somebody, right, in Colombia, and they stuff her into this dress with big cleavage and all that stuff. I mean, she's a beautiful thing, but that's not who we are, right? We're also doctors and restaurant workers and teachers, like we're everything, and that deserves to be spoken. And the other thing that deserves to be spoken is along economic lines. Like sometimes in fiction, kids of lower socioeconomics are drawn as needing something, not being loved quite as much or as well. And I'm not in that same situation now, but when I was young and my mother was newly arrived, I certainly was dealing with economic problem, and I was loved. There were plenty of things in place for me. And so it's really important to draw our families respectfully and as we are. Now, why I'm so excited to hear that you are writing is that publishing needs you desperately. This is your time to step forward, because publishing continues to be a largely white endeavor. Most of the stories written and published are by or about white characters, right? And they just did a study. Lee and Lowe is a publisher in New York, and they did a baseline study of who's in the jobs in publishing. Who are the editors? Who are the marketing people? Who are the publicists? And it's mostly white women. And that has not stopped my editor, Kate Fletcher, who's a white woman, from being a fantastic editor. But how amazing to have your voice at the table saying, that book doesn't really feel authentic, they got this wrong. Or I have discovered this writer in this town that we should publish. So whether you're the writer or whether you like to edit and fix stories, whether you're an illustrator, whether you want to review books, whether you want to work in business and marketing and do it in publishing, I can honestly tell you that publishing is looking for you. So consider a career in the literary arts, because it's so needed to name our experience and to just stop being invisible. It's impossible to, in my mind, when I think of the sheer numbers of Latinos in this country, when I compare it to the books that are coming out, it's just really alarming.
So throughout the book, in Yaki Nagalo's book, dancing has made what made Pity feel in her comfort place, aside from all the hardships that she has been living. And also in like your other books, you have written about dance. So I wanted to know, what has driven you to write about dance?
Because if I ever come back in another life, I want to come back as a dancer. I love dancing. It's sick. And the saddest thing is that I'm married to a man for 32 years who is the worst dancer. If you were trying to make a bad dancer, you couldn't make a worse one. He's a Cuban man. I say, ¿Cómo es esto es posible? It's just awful. I go, the rhythm, Javier. No, nada. In one ear, out the other. Fatal. So, I just love dancing. I just love to move. The thing I love about Latin music too, in particular, is that it sounds so happy, especially Americans. They're moving to it, and it's like this really deep, dark lyric that's going with it about social justice, about, like all this stuff. And so there's something about that that's really interesting to me. I love that the music draws from Europe, from Africa, from indigenous traditions, which is who we are, right? And so there's just something about la clave, the rhythm of it, the universality of the joy that I really just love. But if I come back, if you ever see a dance or anything, Meg Medina. Okay.
For your book, Burn Baby Burn, out of all the serial killers in the world, why did you pick Son of Sam?
Oh, because he was the one in Queens. He killed people that a few blocks from my house. One of his first murders, I lived on 158th Street. It was like 162nd Street where this one happened, up by the railroad track. You know, this young couple came out of the bar and sat in their car to talk or whatever. The guy, the boy, had long hair. And so Son of Sam killed people with a 44 bulldog or bullnose revolver. And he would just walk up to the car and shoot, and that would be that. And he would always shoot the girl first. But that time, he got confused. He thought this young man was the girl, and he shot her first. The girl was actually the daughter of one of the police detectives of the local police precinct. And it was just scary to walk through neighborhoods and know that some killer had just been there the night before, and that he didn't look like one, you know, because no one pointed him out or anything like that. He just kept disappearing. So, you know, he's just a big figure in history. Now, the hard part of it was this, though. So this is historical fiction, right? So he really existed, and he killed real people with real names, whose parents, whose brothers and sisters, whose cousins still live and miss them. So how do you write about that respectfully without making it sensational, right? And using it for entertainment? That weighed heavily on me. Because if it were my daughter who had been hurt that way, I would never want her murder used in that way. So it was such a balance of trying to respect history and also to really try to show how the impact and the senselessness of the loss of these beautiful people. It was 13 people that he ended up killing or hurting by the end of his reign of terror.
My question is kind of like related to her kind of question, because I read that you like the salsa.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you like do anything other type of dancing? Because I'm also a dancer. Yeah. So like any other type of dancing you would like to learn? Or?
Well, I'll tell you. As a little kid, I did all those things. I remember the Hannah Kroner School of Dance. It was on Northern Boulevard, and I faithfully marched up there every Saturday. So, you know, it's all beautiful. I like merengue, I like bachata, I like salsa, all of it. What is my exercise? I go to Zumba class. Like, it always comes back to the music. But, you know, I'm open to all kinds of dance. But, like, who am I going to dance with? Javier? No. Right? And, you know, I'm married a long time. I can't go roaming a disco. So you know, I have to wait for people. I encourage people to get married all the time so I could go to their weddings to dance. You know, I do that.
Yeah.
So, that's it.
Well, other people have asked you, like, what made you try to become a writer? Being such a cliche question, but my question is, you mentioned Sandra Cisneros. When you figured out that there was a different literary canon, did that inspire you to become a writer, or was it beforehand that you wanted to be a writer?
You know, I think I was always drawn to story because my family tells stories. When they came from Cuba, I think they were really traumatized by the experience. And you know how it is, like, who you are in this country is sometimes very different than who you were in your home country. At least, you know, it was that way for my parents. So I think my aunts, my uncles, my grandparents, they kept telling me stories, I think, to give me a sense of who I had been or what I had come from before this, right? Before the free and reduced lunch form, before the little apartment in Queens. Like, there was another life, another way that we were. And I'm so grateful for that. I wasn't necessarily grateful at the time, although my grandmother told good stories, inappropriate stories. Abuela, she had no idea, like, what you should talk to little kids about and what you shouldn't, like that. And that one in my neighborhood, she used to have boyfriends, like, and I was 6, you know, and I was like, really? And she would just tell these incredible tales about hurricanes, about, you know, the death of people, about when they would come through the town and shoot the dogs because there was a rabies epidemic going on, like all of these things that you should not tell someone 7. But she did. And what that does is it gives you a sense of story. It gives you a sense of timing. And mostly over time, it gives you a sense of depth about people and experience and imagination, like the listening and the conjuring of what she was saying. And that was such a gift. And my grandmother went to school only until the 8th grade. So I don't come from people who were terribly educated, but I come from people who loved people and who knew suffering and who knew good times. And their example and their willingness to share that with me just sort of gave me the sense of story. And then because I was a reader and because I liked words, it just became an impulse. You probably feel that, right? You just have to write it. And there's something incredible when what's inside of you gets released on a page. And when that happens, then there's no going back. It's like when the artist finally figures out how to draw what's on his retina and not what he thinks he's seeing, but what actually registers in the eye. It's the same thing with writing. There's some moment that happens when you're writing what's actually in your heart, and then it's so powerful, there's no way to not do it again.
Well, we have about 4 more minutes, so maybe time for another question.
You want to ask him?
Or should we let Mr. Scott?
Yeah, because I know this
He's been a good cheerleader back
This has
there.
been fantastic. I love the environment you created with the Salon Corazon in the Yaki book.
Yeah.
Was that inspired by a real place in your neighborhood?
Yes. My mother worked in a factory. Okay, so there's two things. Like when you're writing, this is advice. Okay? Because if you write people exactly the way they are, they will hate you for it. So you need to be like Dr. Frankenstein. You start taking from everybody and you mix them up into new versions. So there was a beauty parlor my mother used to go to, and she used to go every Saturday, and the hairdresser there was a man, I am not kidding, named Fabio. Right? So in the book, it's the dog with the long hair. Frankenstein number 1. Frankenstein number 2 is that my mother, in this factory, it was a sea of Latina ladies. They had come from all different countries, and also a group of sheltered workers. In other words, people who had intellectual disabilities and other disabilities. And there was a man, Simon, who was deaf. They were like 5 or 6. And so they worked in this transistor factory. If you ever open a radio, you'll see these little the transistors. Branding them, cleaning them, testing them. It was the most boring work in the world. But it was just a sea of women. And they would put on their radio with one little, we called it the earpiece. You guys pretend you have one earbud, right? And then the other earbud, they could hear everybody's business. And they would just talk about their lives. You know, how to talk to the super that there was no hot water, where you got your working papers, where you could get help for your son if this was happening, where you could, like, it became a network of how to survive in the United States. And it was so loving, and it was so powerful. And I've written about this before because this is how powerful it was. Like, over the years, we'd get married, like the children of these women, and like, guess who was in attendance? Estas señoras. And then as they went dying, because they're all old, right? In their 80s and 90s now, every time someone passes, you'll always find 1 or 2 of them there to pay respects. And that was true for my mother's death a few years ago. And it was so touching. They were all suffering together and bickering together and working together and being bored together. But like, there's something about community that's so necessary when you're an immigrant, to just make sense of every day, and also just make sense of who your children are becoming. And you know what this is because you're American children, right? But you're bicultural children. But there's a piece of you that's totally different than your parents or your grandparents that they can't understand. And they're working so hard to figure it out. So that's where Salon Corazon came from. And just the fantasy. Wouldn't it be great? I'd love to have a Salon Corazon. The music playing, you spend all day there, having your nails done. It would be fantastic. You know?
Dream.
And we, as a group, have a gift for you.
Oh, yeah! I won't tell my dentist. Let the record show I am holding a gigantic box of milk duds.
And there's a card written from all of us and a cozy so you can remember the U of A in Tucson.
Let me tell you, this has been my favorite part of this whole festival.
Oh, thank you.
This is actually what it's all about. So I'm so glad that I got invited.
Thank you.
We can have the autographs outside here at the table, and then some more photos